Evening.
And welcome to all of you for the session. 1 minute, I'm sharing this slides now. 1 minute. So today's session is just one of the series of sessions of web webinars. And thanks to Ronnie, Zarina for joining the panel. And I'll just rush to the slides to talk about what is this webinar series all about. And I'll hand off to Anand then. So object of the webinar series is we want to ask questions and find answers together. What, how, why rural transformation for India is critical. What we can and cannot learn from corporates, opportunities and challenges, and what next for like-minded CSR and NGOs. I think this is a webinar series. Hopefully at the end of the series, we should be able to find solution for all of them working together. My presentation will cover Deshpande Foundation's perspective on this. So I come from corporate experience of 30 years in the technology chip design. So I know a lot of innovation that happens in corporate, and it can be, some of them can be very useful for the NGOs. So I'm bringing that. But this is just learning, and 1%, I believe, of what India needs for rural transformation. So it's very small, very humble presentation, the kind of approach, what we are learning. And we are waiting for a lot of NGOs and other CSR members to tell us how we can do better. So rural transformation ecosystem. No, it's not rural transformation, it's a mobile communication ecosystem. But I'm going to bring the relevance of mobile communication ecosystem, how it is relevant to the rural transformation when you're looking at analogy. It will come after a few slides towards the end. So why rural transformation is critical for India's growth? First of all, you see per capita income. We have actually kind of 1/3 the income for rural worker compared to the worker in the urban area. So it's like that increases forced migration, and that also creates disparity between the rural and the urban. Second, 55% of the labor force in India is actually working on farming, but GDP impact is 14%, very significantly lower. If that can be grown, sure, India will definitely kind of become a better better GDP, and rural will become more empowered, and disparity will go down. And last but not the least is less than 12% of companies invest CSR in rural areas. And there may be reason for it. And if we can increase that, I'm sure the bigger problem of rural transformation can be solved. If you look at the pyramid of India of 1.37 billion people, there are disposable income, thousands of startups are solving their problem. Whereas for the bottom of the pyramid, there's no startup starting. The startup are trying to solve the problem, but they don't have inroads into how to reach to the rural India. And I'll talk about that in next few slides. Not that CSR are not interested to invest in rural and innovation, but the challenges they must be facing is lack of tracking and monitoring system processes in the rural hinterlands of India. So they invest around metros wherever they're existing, there are companies are, head offices are. Limited employee engagement. Employees cannot travel 400 kilometers. So it's better to invest near the metros, but that is not really India. And third, constraint in measuring effectiveness of innovation. First of all, it's difficult to measure impact in the rural area. Now we're talking about innovation. So that could be another reason why CSS are not investing enough in the innovation. So what is the opportunity? I think we all together in the series, over the next few series, will identify together and solve the problem of how we can invest in rural better way, how can we track, and how can invest in innovation. Now the question comes is, innovation means what? And so what I'm going to do is, just to make sure that people understand what innovation is, we'll tell our perspective of it. It could be our go only, it might be limited success, but this is a way we think it is innovation can be done by looking at corporate, and definitely we'll take inputs from the other members to see how we can improve better. So one of the example I can give is, we are looking at kind of a scalability of residential skilling, how to scale students. funding per impact basically was total cost minus the student fees. And we said that without student fees, any program is not going to be successful because there's no value. If the beneficiary doesn't see the value, that program is not valuable. And we assume the salary of the student, which is varying from 1.5 lakh to 2 lakh to as a 1.5 lakh for better calculation. So what we are looking at is the phase one. We had trained 3K students with 40K as a cost per impact. That means 3K into 40K is 12 crore as our kind of funding cost. And impact was actually kind of a 45 crore, which is 45 crore is basically kind of a 3K multiplied by the salary, which is 1.5 lakhs per year. So rough ratio is basically cumulative impact is divided by funding cost is around 3.7. Good number to go to phase two because it was working. We had 75% placement done. Second phase, we started with, can we improve the placement for 70 to 75% to 80%? 7K youths, 55K cost minus 20K fees. So 24 crore is kind of a funding cost, and ratio is actually kind of a 4.3 times. So we increased the impact by funding cost ratio. Great. But then we said, 10 years, next 5 years, if you want to scale this training to 100K youth, what will be our cost? And looks like we will need actually kind of 200 crore funding for next 5 to 10 years. And we'll have actually kind of a 1,500 salaries annually created. So rough ratio is 7.5. Good number, but this is the kind of a disaster. We cannot have 200 crore coming over next 5 to 10 years. So this model is not scalable. So we had to stop this and just say, hey, not workable, go back to the drawing board, go to the phase one again, phase two again, and see how we can actually improve this. So what we did was, we looked at the non-residential model. The challenge was 500 plus colleges are going through the non-residential skilling, but average placement is less than 15%. Then that is not workable. So we had to work with startups, work with colleges, work with different partners to see how we can kind of modify the learning and improve the employability to at least 70-75%. So we did in last 2 years, 500 youth. The average cost was 12K. Students paid anywhere from 5,000 to first year 5,000. Second year, when our placement was 70%, they paid 7,000. Average is 6K. So we invested 30 lakhs for 500 students, and our return was basically kind of a 75% placement with 7.54 people kind of a revenue. So immediately from 5, the ratio goes to 25, which is very good. We now are looking at this model going to 50 colleges, and our cost will be same as the student fees, which is 7,000 rupees. We believe that we'll be able to place it, but we'll need capex of that. So I'm just getting rough capex of 10 crore over next 5 to 10 years. That will kind of increase our cumulative impact divided by total cost to 200 plus. So we will be able to manage this, and this can really scale. I think that's kind of a beauty, and I would say opportunity of R&D we can do. So this is not only one example. I'm going to take one more example and then kind of complete the innovation part. So farm pod. We started farm pod. We realized that farmers were saying that unless I have water, I cannot manage water better. And I'm doing only one crop because I depend on the rain. So can you give us a pond? So we did 150 ponds with all our cost, 125K maybe per pond, because we used to do one pond, few ponds in one village, few ponds in another village. Total cost was 1.8 crores. Return for the farmer, if you look at the farmer of this size and having a 5 acre average farm and 1 lakh per acre farm, 5 acre land is returns. It's like a 20K delta per acre. So we are saying that 25,000 is per acre income from the farmer. By doubling it, we get close to 25, but we are saying 20K as an approximation. We will get actually less than 1 ratio if you do this farm pond model. And government were paying actually kind of a farmer subsidy. So why would they pay any money? So we tried to work with the farmers and say, we will give the machine, we'll implement it. Can you give at least the driver fees and the diesel fees? And we got 5,000 farmers willing to do that. So we get 44,500 farm ponds in the phase 2. And the cost was from 45K to 25K. Last year was 25K because we started using the rented machines. The input cost was actually kind of 5.57 crore. 45 crore was the returns. So immediately we started seeing that the returns are now 28 times because our cost has gone from 125K down to around kind of a average 30K, 35K. So now we are now looking at scale up model, 1 lakh ponds. North Karnataka needs more than lakh ponds. So India needs millions and millions of ponds. Now, if it's 25K, which is the rental of a excavator, the cost will be 250 crore. Returns are good. 40 times we'll get returns, but 250 crore, we started talking to the CSR. We got some ready, but then at one time, our founder, Desh, he said, no, 250 crore, why don't we reinvent it and see whether farmers can pay for it? I think though there's a new model that we are going to think about it. So this model is not going to work. We have to go back to the research, R&D basically, and piloting. And our first pilot will start in October. And Desh, in the panel discussion, will talk more details about it. What are we going to do uniquely to make sure that farm pond scales? With that, all innovation. What does Deshpande Foundation perspective means for rural transformation? So we are saying, can we transform 10,000 villages, increase GDP by 2x, and impact all the sustainable development goals significantly? And only 3 areas foundation has expertise: edu-skilling, agriculture, and livelihood. Rest all areas, we are saying that when we partner with the NGOs, like-minded NGOs, because we are ignorant on all the 3 areas. And this is the only way we can actually make a transformation happen for the rural. And we are looking for partners. So hopefully in this webinar series, we'll find right partners, we'll kind of join hands, co-create solution, not only this bottom area, but even in the top area, we might have only 2 solutions, but we might need 8 to 7 solutions which are productized and scalable, and thereby we can work with the with the partner NGOs. Now, with that in mind, only way we can solve. So it says that we need tens and tens of solutions. We have only 2 now, and we are trying to work on scalable and sustainable solution. Scalability and sustainability should be from the funding as well as impact as well as execution point of view. So can we have multiple stakeholders, startups, social enterprises, corporate, NGOs, all the people working together, multiple ideas experimented, maybe only out of 100 ideas, 2, 3, 4 ideas will succeed, and that will end up in rural transformation. If that can happen, I think it will be a transformation for India, and I'm sure with the new model we can start, we can co-create solutions, working together, putting hands together. Now, corporates are doing it. Corporates compete with each other, but they have an R&D unit called Sematic in US, which 100 crore is funding from competitors who are competing in the marketplace, but they're actually funding the Stanfords, MITs together for R&D of common thing. Why not NGO? Because we are have to solve the same problem. So I talked about first slide, rural transformation ecosystem, and this is a mobile transformation. So similar to rural mobile ecosystem, we need to have a rural transformation ecosystem where different blocks can be changed by different blocks and together. And I don't know, we can find out that question marks. What does it mean for India? What does it mean for it to make an ecosystem work? And we, as a Deshpande Foundation, as NGO, not doing even 1/10 of what we have to do for the country. So we want another 10, 15 organizations working together to solve this problem. So with that in mind, I think the question I have to ask to Anand is, he can take over from here. How can private CSR, philanthropy, and NGOs contribute to rural transformation and innovation ecosystem? And if that we can answer through this today's sessions with panel discussion with Anil, and that will be great. And special thanks to Swades, Tata Trust, and Pani Foundation for helping us to ask a lot of questions before we started this webinar. Without their help, we could not have created this webinar. So thank you. And
thank you, Vivek. Now. Yes, thank you so much. So hi, my name is Anant, and it's a pleasure to get to interact with this group. And I think one of the things we wanted to cover today is really learn from the journeys that Ronnie, Zarina, and Desh have gone through, and really what have been some of the ups and downs. Why did the journey start the way it did? And of course, what have been, as a result, potential opportunities for both, the role of philanthropy, but also, of course, the challenges there. Just to get us started, and again, it's a it's a panel that needs more introduction, but given that, if I could maybe start with Ronnie and then Zarina with both of you on a little bit of, it's been amazing, you're well known around having built businesses and obviously having built phenomenal media track records, but then you have taken a very focused and a really, really deep, in-depth look at rural transformation, and it's a very inspiring model. And even as I learned a little bit more, the focus on outcomes, the focus on getting the pull orientation was pretty strong. Do talk to us a little bit around what got you started and why this journey, and what have been a few learnings that you've had. Maybe Ronnie, if you could get us started, and then Zarina, that'll be great. Thank you.
Zayna is much better at storytelling. I'm going to ask her to start the story, and I'll maybe get to the hard facts after that. So let Zayna start. Go ahead.
Okay, firstly, I just wanted to thank Desh very much for having us. Anand, thank you for having us. It's a real privilege to be here amongst all of you. In fact, when we were starting our journey, Ronnie and I visited Desh in Hubli, and we got a wonderful perspective from you and all the wonderful work you're doing. So congratulations. It's really lovely to be here with you today. I think 6 years later, if I'm not mistaken. So our journey, I think what is pertinent to say is that for 20 years, we've been in rural India. As a very small foundation called Share, when we divested UTV, we decided to scale up, and there are a lot of personal stories, which I'm not going to get into now, because there's no time actually. But in short, in 2012, Ronnie said to me, let's lift 1 million people out of poverty. And I thought that was such a kick-ass, crazy idea that I said, okay, I'm jumping right in. And the first thing we did is we knew, I think it's quite important, that we knew nothing about poverty. So the first year, Ronnie and I traveled extensively all over the country, including to Hubli and Sandbox. And we spoke to entrepreneurs, we spoke to philanthropists, we spoke to government. And we also finally land up at BRAC, and we met Sir Faisal, who was our deep inspiration. And finally, in 2013, May, we signed our first, what we call job sheets, which is a UTV thing to do, which is how you're going to spend your money, what is the goal. It's about 20 pages long. It's really a pain. Nobody in Swades could understand. At that time, we had also changed the name to Swades to make it more accessible to our community. So I'll tell you the tenets, the principles of this 1-year journey. And I need to say also that every principle went again, almost everything. Everyone told us the opposite. And we decided to do this. So basically, when we came up with these principles, everyone thought we were kind of mad. So we wanted to actually create a model of rural development, which can lift 1 million people out of poverty every 5 years. An ecosystem for rural transformation that can lift 1 million people out of poverty every 5 years. This is our stated objective. Have we reached it? No. But we're at the halfway mark, where we today touch 500,000 people. Have we lifted them all out of poverty? No. But are we learning? Are we nearer to getting a model that we believe works? That I can say yes. After many painful lessons, which even Ronnie can talk about, I'll tell you some of our basic principles. We believe that poverty is not just material. It is very much mental. It is very much starting in the mind. And it comes in the form of a lack of hope, a lack of aspiration. And one of the main things that we realized over this 6-year period, and also is the tenet of the Share, which was the community must take charge. The community must be developed to dream, to have a can-do attitude. And I think empowered communities is the key to all transformation. Absolute key. It's in the center and the heart of Swades. And this came as a very hard learning, which we were telling Desh and you the other day, that in the beginning, when we came in with all our corporate thinking and our goals and, hard goals, pushing it down from above, it was not the way to work. And we have learned that we need to change to a pull strategy. We need to attract people. We need to inspire. We need to motivate. We need to change their mental framework. Yeah. So that's the first learning. And it was a very hard learning because we always said rural empowerment. Were we doing empowerment? No, we were doing charity. And that's not the way to go. I mean, you touched upon people paying, but far more than that, they need to actually take charge of the transformation process. Okay, so empowered communities is the first principle. The second principle is collaborate, 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 collaborate. I cannot say this enough times. So we collaborate with the government. We have signed MOUs with them. If you want to scale, you need them on your side. And we have found fantastic people in the government at the district level, at the state level, who have really backed us. I don't think without them, we can expand the way we've been expanding. Also, multiple partners, like you touched upon, I think Vivek touched upon very, very, very accurately. We are, which Ronnie will touch more upon, the 360-degree model cannot work without collaborative NGOs who are experts in their field. So we work with multiple experts, okay? The next is we have a geographical approach, which means we take a specific geography, 6 blocks, large geography, okay? And we work within the entire geography. And we bring our entire model to bear in this geography, okay? It's a what do you call it? What's the right word?
Concentric.
Yeah, well, no, actually, but you get the picture, right? It's one geography. I don't know what the word is. So contiguous is the actual expression, okay? It's a contiguous geography. And within that, we have 2,500 villages. We have 500,000 people. And we have a staff of 300 really superb people. I really take my hat off to them because they've been working right through COVID, right through Nisarg. And the critical thing is we're a grassroots execution foundation. We actually work on the ground with the community day to day, learning with them, sharing their joys and their sorrows, and really tweaking our model as we go along. And then now I'm going to hand over our most difficult and the main thing where everyone told us, no, you're crazy, stop it, don't do this, was our 360-degree model, a holistic development model, where everyone said, no, 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 do one thing and do it well, you know, and we said, no, because if you want to lift people out of poverty, what are you going to leave out? Are you going to leave out water? Are you going to leave out toilets? Are you going to leave out education, health, and of course, livelihoods? So with that brief introduction, I'll just hand it to Ronnie to talk more about maybe our 360 or whatever.
Yeah. No, I'll top up on 3 specific areas because I think Zayna's covered a lot of that. Just on the 360 degrees, I think, 6 years, 7 years, 8 years back when we were evaluating that, and 5 and 6 years when we started embarking on it, it was still very unique. I think today more and more there's a high level of acceptability that everything is connected. Health, water, sanitation, livelihood, everything is connected. At that stage, everyone felt focus was much more important. I don't disagree with the focus part. We just took that approach. But our one-liners as goal sets were each and every of our households should have 2 taps and drinkable potable water all the time. 2, they'd help build their toilet. It would be an attached toilet and they would use it. So it would have to be open defecation free. And you can't solve the sanitation problem without solving the water problem first. The third one, in education, we wanted to focus on working with the infrastructure, not going out and creating parallel schools when there were already schools, but augmenting the entire thought process. And our simple goal there was 100% of our kids should pass the 10 standard and at least 50% in first class. In each of these, baselines were very, very low. In health is really where the big challenge was for us, where we had to focus on anything where the community was hit by more than 1% of it. And lastly was livelihood, which is really where we felt the permanent change would happen, because when we moved the baton for them to take control of their own destiny, that was what it was. I think a lot has been said today, and I just want to add there, the focus for all of us today is how do we make execution foundations. I think there's a lot happening in philanthropy, but our focus has been to roll up our sleeves, whether it's Zarina and me, whether it's our colleague and CEO Mangesh, who's also on this in the next panel, and everyone else. It's about a hands-on approach, because actual rural transformation needs nimbleness, needs feedback. It needs us to be able to hear, listen. We do that in our jobs all the time. Listen, observe, react, respond, change, and make that. Why would we not do that? We can't go in with a one-size-fits-all with every approach. So the entire interactivity, and I think Zayna's favorite one is our village development communities, which is really where they're the ones who we hand over, they create everything else. And the last insight I'd like to give, because livelihood is an important part of the final transformation, and I think, Vivek and others touched on it a little earlier, our approach on this whole livelihood is really to look at it as a GDP approach. We don't look at single households. We look at all our households and we look at the entire area, because whatever we do, we have to transform neighbors, we have to transform ecosystems. And if we push 10,000 farmers into agriculture, but we don't have a distribution setup, an entire setup where, whatever their produce is going to get the right market price, we won't be able to get there. So I think what we have very well achieved in our halfway mark is that, for example, if our outlay in our community is about, say, 50 crores a year, our KPI or our KRA is that same 50 crores of input, whether it's in giving animals, goatry, cows, or water for irrigation. From the next year onwards, that number of households or that entire geography has to have an augmented income of 50 crores going forward forever. And I think it took us 3 years to get there, but that's pretty much where we're at right now. And that to us is one of our bigger achievements also today, along with our village development communities, that we've actually been able to look at this as a GDP approach. For every 50 crores you go in, 50 crores of annual recurring additional income. And that's pretty much, so I just want to leave these couple of thoughts here and pause. Thanks. Thanks, Anand.
Thanks, Ronnie. Thanks, Zarina. And I think this whole point of recurring and the fact that it sort of almost builds a momentum like a movement is so powerful. If I can bring in Desh, and again, Desh, you have built businesses, and obviously there are things which are similar and things which are very different. What has been your learnings, and what have been a few things or principles which stick with you as you thought about that? And do make a connection also to a couple of the points we heard from Ronnie and Zarina on things which are like exactly similar to the for-profit sector and where there could actually be learnings, but things where, look, things are actually a little more complex here. Talk a little bit about that, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Anand. Ronnie and Zarina, if it wasn't for COVID, we'd be doing this either from Raigad or Hubli. But at least we get to do this on video, so that's a good thing. So, unlike Zarina and Ronnie, I do live 10,000 miles away. So in some ways, I'm probably not as connected as they are, because they're probably in Raigad a lot more than I am in Hubli. But I do have a little bit of a distant perspective. And so like Ronnie and Zarina, I also came from the for-profit world. And so this is a relatively new business, last 15, 20 years. And I think the point that Zarina made is something that's very important. That is, a lot of us, we build businesses understanding our customers, because in those businesses, our customers are very much like us. In this business, where the customers have a very different risk tolerance, they're very different, they live very differently, it's very presumptuous of us to assume that we know what they need. So co-creating the solution, building capacity within those communities, making them sustainable is a very, very important concept. And it's not as well understood. If I look at philanthropy in the US, it's $400 billion a year. And unfortunately, and almost everybody, I've been on the board of MIT for 20 years now, and I see how much compassion these people have and how hard they work, really trying to solve the problems in Africa, India, and everything else. And it's huge amount of compassion, it's a huge amount of effort. But then what happens is it becomes very clubby. We all get together and try to come up with solutions for these people. And every idea is better than the previous idea. But there's no capacity in those communities to absorb those solutions. So building capacity and building these communities, very much like what Ronnie and Zarina talked about, is probably the most important concept when we talk about this part of the economy, as opposed to the economy that we're all used to in the corporate world. Secondly, in the corporate world, because of the competition, we don't stand still, right? I mean, you have version 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0. You blink and you're dead. So you have to keep up with everything. And that's what makes it scalable. And things become sustainable when you spend less than what you bring in, like Zarina and Ronnie were talking about, and you scale them because you constantly work on making things cheaper, better, and faster because you have to keep up with the competition. And so I think what we're trying to do is to bring those two concepts to what we're trying to do. Number one, co-create the solution, build capacity within those communities so that there's actually a free market space that sort of opens up in some ways, because unless they're ready to consume, they're ready to buy into things, things don't happen. And secondly, find ways so that the philanthropic money, the $400 billion that we spend in US or quite a bit now in India, doesn't just go into creating ideas, but it's connected back to the problems so that those innovations that we come up with are meaningful. But we do have to invest in that innovation, in new ways of coming things so that things do become cheaper, faster, and better. So the example would be the example that Vivek left off, where we spend roughly about 80,000 rupees to build a farm pond. You know, the previous thousands of farm ponds we have done, we've shared the cost with the farmer. But the next 100,000 we're trying to do so that the farmer only pays 20,000 upfront. We get him a loan of 60,000, and then he pays it back in 2 years. And where we are spending a lot of our mind share is on improving that solution better and better. How can we make it better? You know, I talked about how these ideas in vacuum don't have an impact. But at the same time, when you build the capacity and you build that capability to absorb these ideas, you can make those ideas more and more sophisticated. For example, our CTO from Silicon Valley, he has the ability to, there's a satellite that goes around India that clicks photographs every 5 days. And so given a piece of land, he can recreate the history of that piece of land for the last 10 years. He can tell you what was the flow of water, how much did the farmer grow, and so on. So you can sort of bring a lot of that technology to bear to see the creditworthiness of the farmer, to tell him exactly where to locate the water pond, and so on. So it's really bringing those new innovations so that things can become cheaper, better, and faster.
Thanks, Desh. And the topic of innovations is key, right? Because in a way, this is the part where it's harder to also sometimes access money. And I'd love to bring Zarina, Ronnie back a little bit. You have at this point, obviously put in a lot of your own capital, and a lot of the journey has been about making innovations happen and obviously fine tuning. As you think of many such opportunities, there is a need for so much more innovation, so much more process innovation as well as ideas as well. And many of these will come from the field. Some of them will fail. What would be your learnings on that, and also suggestions on saying what is the role of philanthropy, including corporate CSR, on embracing the principles of innovation? I guess one big principle is being comfortable with failure, which is sometimes hard because there is a tendency to almost want guaranteed returns. So talk a little bit on that, and also, do you feel it's moving in the right direction, or do you feel we are still very risk averse in terms of the funding community itself?
So Anand, I'll say three quick things there. One, when we started off at the scaled up level, for the first 1 or 2 years, we needed to show proof of concept. Like anything else, like you do in the for-profit space, you have to show proof of concept. So the first 2 years was proof of concept, because obviously everyone was skeptical about the 360-degree approach. And I think for the first 2 years, therefore, it was complete 100% our research. Our input and our money. But I think the transformation really started with us, with a great partner we had, which was Tata Trust, for example, where we met with Mr. Tata just once or twice, and then he said, done. And then the entire organization and the trust came behind us. And they really validated what we were doing, because we thought with such epic work that the Tata Trust has been doing, if they can sort of endorse us and say yes and a thumbs up, that gave us a lot of self-confidence for ourselves also. And they really started us off. And that was the beginning of a further endorsement for our model and for taking that off. So that was the first step. Second, I think for us, unlike many NGOs here that do have a challenge where you first make a project, you make a project report, and then you wait for it to get funded before you implement it. I think our flexibility that we're blessed with is that we continue to commit our funding. So we won't stop for anything because a community can't do a stop and start. And I think a major part of the problems in India is this stop and start with an NGO level, where by the time you decide there is a gap and a need, you prepare a project report, you get the funding, that community thinks you've already abandoned them. So with us, that continuity has always been a very strong element where we move forward and we hope, and I think as for-profit entrepreneurs, we're used to living on the edge. We're used to making a commitment, going forward and knowing, well, something will happen, the resources will come, the funding will come. So I think that's been something for us that's been very supportive. So to us, that model extenuates that. And I think once we got to our first level of 2 years of proof of concept, then I think we got a very strong endorsement with Tata Trust and an incredible amount of experience with them. And then the rest of the corporates started coming in. Today, I think about 50% of our annual budget comes from corporates. I mean, we can call it CSR, whatever, but they're very involved corporates who come in and support what we want to do. And about 50% comes from our own resources as we go forward. And people respect that we are an execution foundation. We have our own people, we have our own technologists, we have everything else. So I think that's a good model to go with, where if you can have continuity in an NGO and not project to project, I think we need to shift to that.
Just to add, Ronnie, to Ronnie's point, the funding part is not just 50-50. It is also very much the community giving their own money.
Yeah.
And now, because things have become so tough in the last 7 months, we are relaxing that rule a little bit and changing it to Shramdan, which is voluntary labor for the poorest of the poor, but not anybody else. And because it is critical that the community pays a little bit of money, a small sum, maybe 10%. In the case of Adivasi, it's a very small percentage, or in case of women-led households, etc. But they must commit financially to the project, not just saying, yes, 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 we think it's a super idea. And I think one of the big things, which I don't know if Ronnie and I touched upon, maybe we did, and I think Desh actually used the word, I think Vivek also used the word, is exit strategy. See, if you want an exit strategy, which is a key to Swades, you cannot do it without empowered communities. And I want to talk just a little more about the VDCs, which I actually didn't touch upon. And as Ronnie said, is my favorite thing, And the reason it's my favorite thing is, I mean, we do a lot, as Ronnie spoke about in our model, but none of it is sustainable. We cannot exit that village until we have an empowered community structure, an institution which is committed to taking it forward without us, i.e. bye-bye Swades, hello community, okay? So we have created, and it's not very new, but the way we have gone about doing these, I mean, we have written it down. I think we're on the verge of developing a white paper where others can actually follow moment to moment. We have a 100-day program, which we've designed, which tells you step by step how to go about entering a village for the first time. And it involves many things, but at its heart, it's the creation of the Village Development Committee in a particular manner, particular time, with commitments from the VDC. They have to show certain convening powers. They have to show commitment in certain particular things. If they don't do X and Y and Z. And, I think we touched upon it when we spoke, but I need to say that it was our fifth or sixth year of Swades. Share, of course, is a very old NGO, where we decided to do a complete U-turn. We said we will not work in a village. Doesn't matter what we've done in the past. Yes, we've given you toilets. Yes, we've given you water, dairy, etc. But if you do not form a VDC today, we will not come to your village. And it was a huge shock, even for our team. This decision is quite a harsh decision. And it was something that we all were really nervous about, really worried about. Like, what if we lose? What if everything implodes, all our 6 years of work and money? What if it implodes? And let me tell you, today we have 1,000 of them. Most of them are excellent. Not all. Of course, it follows a bell curve, but most of them are doing good work. And we are only working in those successfully. Not only that, thanks to them, we could work in COVID times. We are working today because of those empowered village communities, you know. So without them, we would not be able to work today. It's gold. That's the first thing one must do. I would strongly recommend it.
Thanks, Zarina. I think capital without commitment is the big takeaway I'm taking away. And, you know, there is no benefit of capital without that commitment, and not just commitment from donors, but commitment from communities.
Yes.
That's a powerful thought. I want to bring in Desh. Desh, what has been your experience around the role of philanthropy in innovation? And clearly, you obviously have put in a lot of your personal capital, but also brought in others. But what's working and what's not? And what would be that one or two things which, if it happens, wow, we can then really accelerate this?
You know, like Ronnie mentioned, being an implementing foundation is a huge advantage. In fact, for the first 12 years or so, we were primarily a grant-making agency. You know, Ronnie and Zarina, even when you came there, we were primarily into making grants. And we actually worked with 183 of them. And the idea was to be a little bit more of a venture capitalist. You know, you fund these guys and you help them scale, and hopefully they become large and so on. So Akshay Patra, Agastya, a few of them got very large. But I think there is a very generic problem with the NGO sector. You know, we have 3 million of them in US, about the same number in India. And there's probably maybe 40, 50 of them who are more than 50 crores a year, actually. Very few, right? And even the most successful NGOs have enough cash flow for 2 months. So constantly they're struggling just to keep alive. And so they constantly have to say, I'm the best, you know, because if they slip on that, nobody's going to fund them. Whereas I think when you have a good balance sheet, you can look back and say, hey, this is not good enough. Let me make it better. And there's always opportunity to make things better. And this is what has happened in the other sector, right? The corporate sector. In fact, when I left India in 1973, so when I started my first company in Boston, there were only maybe 5 or 6 entrepreneurs in all of Boston, right? So it was all, the language wasn't there. But you fast forward 40 years and see what's happened. I mean, now we have angel investing, we have Series A, Series B, public markets, Flipkart, Amazon. You know, the whole ecosystem is developed so that if you come up with a good idea that really solves a problem, very likely that will be a very successful company. And so we built that whole ecosystem in the language. And so I think anything that we can do collectively, and all the people on the call today, to develop a language for that. Because today what happens is you go there and say, okay, you give me X, I'll help Y people. They're comfortable with it. And the other thing is also, they always say, hey, you're already a foundation. You know, why do you need money, right? Because they're a little bit more into funding the NGOs who are underfunded. So one of the things that we need to do is to, number one, develop different language. Number two, change the behavior of the NGOs, at least the ones that are really doing good work. We need them to start thinking a little differently and not be hung up on how great they are. You know, we all have opportunities to be a lot better. So,
just to add there, Anand, and just an insight also is that now, especially in the larger CSR funding that's available, people are looking at areas where there is NGOs that can solve problems at scale. You know, and I think they support that, and they're quite happy to be able to do that instead of having that splintered group where you track. Because as they said in his earlier days, he was much more a sort of a giving foundation in some sense of cutting checks. But I think people want to feel more involved and therefore want to be involved with people who can implement at scale. And I think that is one that is also helping out with a lot of people. Because I think for CSRs, just forming their own foundation and having a corpus fund, and now that's even becoming even more challenging. And I think the FCRA rules today have actually changed a fair amount of that today, in India at least, that says, you know, you just can't park it and put it somewhere else. I mean, there are pros and cons, and I'm sure we can have an entire new debate on the change in the FCRA rules, but we won't get into that today. But I think from a CSR perspective, people are looking at scalable opportunities. The other things that I think is in demand for most people, and which we couldn't cater to, was multiple geographies. I think CSR started with most people saying, is it near my factory? Is it near my plant? Is it near my this? And I think that's changing a lot. It's there to a certain extent, but it's reduced a lot, where people normally felt I should do it for my community, which is absolutely right. But now at the level at which they're operating, they do believe it is a pan-Indian problem. So let's approach it in a more pan-Indian way than is it this 19 villages next to my factory. So those are things that I think are evolving and changing and chipping away.
Ronnie, also, like Zarina was saying, when you concentrate on geography, you start getting a critical mass. Yeah. So, we call them sandboxes, but these areas actually become living labs. They're experiments, right? And so it's just like a company that you start in Silicon Valley does not necessarily just cater to Silicon Valley. They become global companies, right? Yeah. So we need to start creating these centers of excellence for the development sector, where we, produce these solutions, and then it's very easy to duplicate them in other parts of India.
Absolutely. And I have to tell you, in the for-profit sector, we look at pan-India. And I think the first time I ever heard the word, and it recurred in my mind recurringly, was in Hubli and your conference, where you kept saying sandbox, sandbox, sandbox. And it didn't strike me then, but then it takes some time. And I think it's very relevant for what work happens in the rural India.
No, I think we learned so much from you, Desh. I think one of the things we learned is that we need to create a model. We really will never be able to achieve this. I mean, whatever we do at whatever scale, we're individuals, and it'll be a pinprick, in India, even in India. If we can create a model that other people can be inspired to follow, and we can break it down into the steps very carefully and beautifully for them, and we can kind of grow this sector in that manner, then it can really scale.
Yeah. But the only thing is, it requires a lot of patience.
Yes.
And so what happens is, particularly either in politics or in science and technology or MIT or any of these things, people want to be able to see dramatic differences right away. And unfortunately, it does not happen. But I think if we can actually get a model going, for example, this farm pond, 100,000 farm pond is an 800 crore program, where it's fully funded, like you say, by the community, right? Yes. And so if you can keep coming up with those solutions, it's not done yet. It'll probably take another 4 years for us to prove that actually it all works and people pay back.
So we've learned a lot, and we can help you with that, because our dairy program is exactly like that.
Okay.
It's a bank.
No.
And we've had a lot of problems. So we'd be happy to, just share them. Mangesh is going to be with you, and maybe he can.
Also, we all have to sort of start learning how to evaluate the credit, and because people do want to lend, but they don't have the good mechanisms.
No, they don't have the good mechanisms.
Very true. It's a big problem, actually. This.
So if you can all come up with a better way to do credit rating for these people, and because there's a lot of data available now.
Yeah, and in our dairy, in fact, that's a challenge, because actually what we've done is we've insured the animal, we've escrowed the income that comes to the household or to the farmer from the chilling plant that actually who he goes to deliver his milk every day. But still, there are challenges of how to do that at scale. You can get 2,000 loans approved, but can you get 20,000 loans approved? That's the challenge.
Yeah. The other lesson has been, the corporate sector starts with a little bit more cold-hearted calculations in terms of whom do you sell to, how much do you sell it for, and all those things. Whereas the nonprofit sector starts with the heart, right? So the nonprofit sector always want to help the most disadvantaged.
Yes.
But then I find that the products that we have can only cater to people of a certain caliber, right? So it's almost like, for example, the farm pond, unless you have 4 or 5 acres of land, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But at least you need to come up with a product that can help those people, but the effort doesn't end there. Then you have to start working with people who can have 2 acres, people who have no land.
Yes.
But if you apply the wrong product to the wrong segment, you fail all the way around.
You're so right.
So it's a tricky affair.
So what we do, Desh, is very interesting, and maybe later Mangesh can take you through it. But we have a dual model. I mean, we have a model for a certain segment of farmer, which would be, say, dairy, okay, or water for irrigation if they have land. We also have worked with Adivasi farmers very successfully, landless people, on water for irrigation through some innovative means of working. And it's quite interesting. But for the poorest of the poor, we have poultry and goatry on a similar model, but it's more grant-based. It's more grant-based, but they still contribute. So, you know, you have to keep, as you rightly said, keep innovating, You cannot believe how much we struggled to get a good poultry program, despite having an NGO whom I won't mention, or maybe I should, but no, I won't. It's not right. Absolutely incorrect model. Absolutely incorrect model. And who suffered? My community. I was very upset because the community suffered, right? In the end, okay, we can take the blows, but can they take a blow? No, they cannot take a blow. So we now are very, very sure that we're going to be pilot. And one thing I want to tell you is, which I think we discussed last time, which you raised so correctly, Desh, you need a lot of patience. And if you want to go fast, you first have to go slow. And it goes against the grain of every corporate person who loves to gallop. But you cannot.
Yeah, and also not compromise on the quality of both the people that you try to help. You know, for example, I love the MIT model. In MIT, admissions is needs blind, which means people just apply and nobody ever looks at their financial status. Once you admit them, then you look at their income. And if the income is below a certain amount, they get full scholarship, you know, living, board, everything else, right?
Wow.
So the needs blind. So it's very heartwarming when you see a kid come. And last year we had a kid here whose parents actually, his dad, he doesn't have a mom, separated. His dad actually collects these cans on the streets in LA, right?
Wow.
So, but it's not like you can take any poor person and plug them into MIT. That doesn't work, right? So I think it's you know, in fact, MIT was all about hands and mind, you know, when it got started, because 150 years ago, there were no educational institutions that actually did anything practical. They were all philosophy and literature and so on. So MIT was the very first institute that said, no, let's put the minds and the hands together, where you use thinking to actually do things. But over the last couple of years, we've changed the whole motto, and now we made it into hands, minds, and hearts.
I was just going to say, that's the Indian way of working. That is the Indian education system. Head, hands, and heart. All three together. Vital.
Yeah. We're going to pass the baton back to Anand too.
Yes, I hate to.
Sorry, Anand. We're just having a conversation.
I'm loving it. I'm loving it. Yeah.
Like being in a living room with him, kind of. You know, Desh, one more, sorry, Anand. I think one more thing which Desh touched on, which I think actually is our weak point in Swades, is the use of technology. You know, and I think there's something that all of us really need to learn from you, because and you and Vivek, because you all are technocrats, you know, and I think that is a phenomenal edge that can give you, like the community, if you put the community at the center, it's a lever. It's a kind of lever. It's a multiplier effect, what we call. I think technology can give it to you in ways we haven't perhaps thought of applying to this sector.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. You know, it's been, in fact, Ratan, we started the Tata Deshpande Innovation Center at Hubli, and also Ratan started Tata Fellows in MIT. So what happened was, we would have a lot of MIT and Stanford guys come to Hubli and spend time there. Yeah. But then there was such a big disconnect between what they were thinking and what needed to get done. So in some ways,
they couldn't bring themselves to the level of the ground.
No, because it's again trying to design products for customers you don't understand.
Yeah.
And so it's taken a little bit of time to build enough capacity within our community. But now we have a CTO, Shubho, who's actually on the call today, who is just an amazing guy, who is very capable, but also very connected. So getting this connectedness and the competence together is a real challenge in this sector. Yes. And I think all of us sort of bring a little bit of that. So.
Yeah, and sorry for cutting you off, Desh, but there is one question from the audience which I'd love to direct at all three of you. There is a need for patience and there is a need for subsuming ego for this to really happen. Because as corporate CSR bets on a few models, and as NGOs also choose not to reinvent the wheel, both impatience and egos can come in the way. Just 1 minute from all three of you on what would be your Monday morning call to action for corporates who are wanting to work in this field, but actually wanting to work in this field in this way. If Zarina, you can start us off, and Ronnie, and then Desh, what would be that Monday morning call to action to make sure that ego and impatience doesn't come in the way of actually making this happen?
So I think, actually, when you first started, I didn't know what I was going to say, but actually, what I think is really needed from the corporates, and Desh touched on it, Ronnie's touched on it, I've also touched on it, is that the corporates need to come to the villages. They need to understand the community we serve. And they need to understand that we are all doing a service. If they do not understand, we have a 4E model, which I didn't touch on. The first E is engage. And not just engage. One of the real lessons of our past, of our media lives, was you have to love and respect your customer or your community. You cannot just, and Desh has touched upon this so much, and Ronnie and I have learned this the hard way, both in our media lives. If we don't know exactly who and how, and we love them, and we really, that's why the grassroots work. Our staff, 95% of them live in the grassroots with the community. So they will tell Mangesh, me or Ronnie, boss, this won't work. If we are coming up with some, Stanford type, innovation, I don't know, but they'll say it won't work, and this is how we should do it. So first is love your community. That's what I would tell the corporates. Go visit, spend time. If you are spending crores of rupees over the next 10 years, buy a government mandate, the CSR mandate, spend the time. And I can tell you, the corporates who have come, they said it's the best day of their lives. That one day in the village with us, we have a beautiful day which we have learned how to plan, and the community takes it forward, okay? And they speak from their hearts, and they talk about success and failures and problems. And that day is, the corporates have always told us, is the best day in their life. If they can come and do that, then there's some understanding, not much, but something to begin work.
So maybe I'll just be a little practical, because the question is a little fair. Corporates do have allocations and they do what they have to do. I think the main part is, the good part about CSR is, unless companies are going to get into profit and then in loss and then in profit, they've got a consistent profit record. So they can definitely make at least a 2 to 3 year commitment and a 2 to 3 year plan. Yeah. I think if they go with an NGO, my first call to them was at least have a 2 to 3 year plan or a 2 to 3 year commitment. It ensures consistency and it allows you to build on that. So that would be definitely one. The second one is, normally what happens with a lot of MNCs is they have a global dictum, that says this year we're going to do water, or this year we're going to do X, or this year we're going to do climate change, etc. I think the urge to them would be, you'll have to figure out more local models in each country in which you want to make an impact. Different in Africa, different in Indonesia, definitely different in India. So how do you get that local, and how do you go back to your board that says, in the broad umbrella, how can I deep down on that and make it a little bit more practical? I think the third one for them would be a little bit of focus on geography, because I think high impact in a concentrated manner today is a strong recommendation if you want to see faster results than sprinkling it over a certain larger, because you want to feel, oh, I'm in 19 states or I'm in 16 states. You couldn't necessarily say you're in 2 states and also do that.
Yeah, so Anant, I think just echoing those sentiments. Number one, I think if we collectively make a commitment to a mission, ego sort of goes away because you're all truly motivated by what you're trying to do. Secondly, in terms of patience, in some ways, people in rural India they have nothing, right? On a scale of 0 to 10, they're probably like 1 or 1.5. I come to MIT and MIT is like 9.8. And then, when I come from the Hubli Sandbox to MIT board meeting, in MIT board meeting, everybody is racking their brains to say, how do we go from 9.8 to 9.81? Whereas in the sandbox in Raigad and Hubli, it's so easy to go from 1 to 1.5. And that's a huge kicker for the people. And it creates so much hope and so much momentum that it's actually, if you look at GDP and everything else, it takes a lot longer. But when you create that excitement and hope, it's a fantastic momentum to create. And people, you can see it, you can feel it. And so like Zarina was saying, we need to get the corporates into these villages so that they can come and experience and feel that excitement so that it doesn't look like nothing is happening.
I think they also need to work with their heart just a little bit. Just a little, not too much, but just a little bit.
Thank you. I think we might have 2 more minutes, and I think just before there is one interesting observation which is coming through. I'd love your reactions, any one of you, which is there is something to do with stage gates that I think Zarina, you mentioned, which is as things move forward, being a little bit objective, and it's hard, right? It's hard to say no to anything, and you took a very courageous. I believe it might have been a very tough decision to say, okay, we love you, but we are not going to go ahead with this village if there is no pull. And it's always hard, right? Because as one leads with the heart, there is also something with the mind which kicks in. Would any one of you want to talk a little bit about why this stage gating is important? And as leaders, why is it hard but important to do that? Especially because I guess you have learned a little bit, right? Zarina saying, push does not work, it has to be about pull. And what were the challenges as you did that? And just with that, I'd love for any one of you, but maybe talk a little bit about how leaders can help that happen, because that's a constant struggle we are also hearing from the audience on how do you take a decision which is actually a mind decision in a topic which is so heart-led. Thank you.
But Anand, that's a very personalized thing that we all think, but we don't actually put ourselves in the other person's shoes, because from their perspective, actually, they're seeing their own outcomes and they're quite okay with that. The problem is if you go with it with your target, I think one of the big mistakes we made in the beginning is we set targets. They were our targets. They were not their targets. So, as much as you do pull and push, and in business, you understand that you want to move from a push business to a pull business if you want to be in B2C. Similarly here, are those your targets or are they their targets? Are they the targets for you wanting to feel good about the fact that, okay, this is what I wanted to do this year, this is what I want to achieve, and do that? And I think if you can shift that onus and bias, that in itself is a very first step to shift the axis from there.
And not just targets, but also aspirations. Is it your aspiration or is it their aspiration? What are their dreams? What are their aspirations?
And I think the Village Development Committee, actually what it happens, forget about the nomenclature of it, is we get them to talk, we get them to involve. So they present to us, we don't present to them. They make a presentation and we sit down there and they're saying, this is it, this is what we want to do, these are our needs, this is our challenges, this is our problems. We give them a basic format and they present. And I think that's really the one where it would make an incredible difference. And one more anecdotal geography, this thing I will give you. When we moved to Nasik district, for example, the collector there invited all of us at Swades. And he brought all his department heads. And in that place, they made a presentation to Swades saying, okay, you are coming in here. Here's the problems. Here are the challenges. Here's what we've not been able to solve. Here's what we have been able to solve. Don't worry about these 3 things because we've taken care of them. This is where we need the need. It wasn't a begging bowl. It wasn't a requisition list. It was incredible. And that mindset, we just had made one preparatory call to them saying, we'd like to come there to really understand the pull versus the push. So I think that part, if you can do here, it'll be phenomenal. It was life-changing.
No, I don't have much more to add to that, Anand. I mean, I think goals have to be set by the community and we have to work towards them. But whatever interventions we're trying to come up with, we are, you're always trying to do something different, because unless you do something different, nothing changes. But that different is you never know whether it's going to work or not. And that's where I think the methodology of failing fast and failing small is important. So that's where the objectivity comes in. And that's where, CSR can add a lot of value, because they're not there every day. they can be a little bit more objective in terms of saying, hey, I think you're heading in the right way, or you're not heading in the right way, in which case you do pivot and make a course correction.
Fantastic, thanks, Desh. And just summarizing, and I think we are beyond the hour. So before we end, I think 3 big messages which one is hearing. One is come to the villages, have a conversation, see what's happening, and engage. And I think the first E, Zarina, engage, like one would engage, have almost a sense of pride in the engagement. I think the second part, a little bit about excitement. Desh spoke about that. There's a lot happening, and while one can take a very, very hard-nosed attitude, patience can come from excitement. And really the third one is, it's about their targets. It's a relationship of equals. And as we move into further conversations between funders and, but most importantly, the communities, how can it be a relationship of equals, like Ronnie said, and not actually charity, because charity ain't gonna work. But if there's a relationship of equals, then there is a chance. Thank you so much, Ronnie, Zarina, Desh, for this conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. And
over to you, Devki, for...
Thank you, Zarina, Desh, Ronnie, and Anand for summarizing it so well for us. And I think that with that, we would like to end this rural transformation webinar for now. But a lot of food for